Hello, everybody. Welcome to MedEdits office hours. I hope you are all doing well. We decided to try office hours during lunchtime, just to see if that was, something that people would be available for, since it is summer. And, while many of our viewers definitely work during the day, certainly there are a lot of our viewers who are working remotely or who are working on applications and are home, especially now that it's end of summer. And many summer programs, if you're in a formal summer program, those are ending. And people are kind of gearing up to go back to college, to go to high school, whatever phase you may be in. So I encourage you to if you're watching live, to type your questions that you may have into the chat. I am happy to answer any questions about medical school admissions, pre-med, residency admissions, fellowship. If you're pre-med, as either a high school student or an undergraduate student, I'm also happy to answer those questions as well. What I may know about, for example, high school summer programs, college applications, all of those kinds of things, BSMD programs. So really, I can answer any questions related to pre-med advising, residency advising, fellowship advising. So at MedEdits, we work with students who are in all phases of their medical education. So some students who are in high school who might be going the BSMD route, or who might be going the traditional MD route, and as well as students who are applying to residencies, to fellowships, contemplating gap years. We at this point have worked with all types of students, quite successfully, as well as students who are considering, special master's programs, post-bac programs, things of that nature. So, we certainly have a very wide knowledge base here at MedEdits, and we also have a very broad and deep group of faculty who have expertise in different areas. So wherever you may be on your journey, we certainly can help you. So just to introduce myself, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Jessica Friedman. I am the president and founder of MedEdits Medical Admissions. I am also a physician and a former admissions officer at both the medical school and residency levels, from the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. And I founded MedEdits Medical Admissions, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 15 years ago. I've honestly lost count. And certainly, kind of getting out of formal academics for me has allowed me to learn much, much more, because I obviously work with a very, very broad range of students, versus when I was at Mount Sinai, there was a very kind of more specific type of student with whom we were working. So, working privately with students, kind of really helps me to understand the full landscape of what's out there, the different types of students, the different paths people take, what are the things that students do to be successful in their paths. So let me go ahead and let's get started. And again, I do encourage you to post questions. I do this for all of you. Whatever questions you have, I guarantee other people have those questions. So by asking those questions, you're helping other people who watch, the recordings of these office hours after we post them. And just to kind of give a little bit of our weekly update of what's happening at MedEdits, our students are definitely starting to get medical school interviews. So we are super excited about that. And we're seeing interviews being extended from, a variety of medical schools from around the country. So that's amazing, but don't despair if you don't have interviews yet. These are the first interviews that are being extended this cycle. So the vast majority of interviews are not going to be extended until, September, October. So if you are among the majority of medical school applicants, who are, still completing your secondary essays, you are right there, kind of in the midst with everybody else. And that is where the majority of our medical school applicants are. Most of them are still working on their secondary essays. We have just a very few students who got everything done super early, and who are great applicants, who do have medical school interviews. Although I must tell you that we have one student who got an allopathic interview, and that person had an MCAT that was below a 508, a majority applicant. So, definitely, certainly, when we work with students on their documents, we really help them to highlight what their strengths are and what they bring to the table, which, of course, allows our students to get more interviews than they probably otherwise would. So that's a little plug for us. Our residency applicants, residency applications are not due in until the end of September. So certainly many of our students for residency are now starting to work on personal statements and ERAS applications. But the residency applicants are usually pretty busy. Many of them don't get started on that until probably the end of this month. So, but we are definitely working with our residency applicants as they get ready for the residency application season. So let me see. So when would I know how much medical school costs after all aids so I can be able to make my decision of which school to choose? I had 4 acceptances. Well, if you had 4 acceptances, at this point, you should know where you are going to medical school. I'm not completely clear on the question being asked, but at this point, any sort of financial aid or scholarship offers should have been extended, certainly. So I would expect that you would already know what the cost is for attending medical school. In terms of costs, and we do have an article on medical school costs on our website, which we will find and link in the chat. But the things that you have to think about, obviously, are tuition. That's number 1. Number 2, room and board, and living expenses. Depending on where you go to medical school, if the medical school has housing for you, obviously those costs can vary quite significantly. So if you wanted to kind of figure out what the potential total costs of attending a medical school would be, we encourage you to look at the MSAR, the medical school admissions requirements. And there you will find not only the tuition costs for both in and out of state applicants, depending on which category you fall into. Obviously, if the school is a private school, the tuition cost is the same for both in-state and out of state. But you're also going to get an idea of the average living expenses. And of course, your own habits and your own lifestyle, and you can sort of approximate those. But you're also going to find out what is the average aid the school extends to their students and how much debt does the average student graduate with. So we find that to actually be a very useful data point that the MSAR does provide. It's provided by each medical school. And that's going to give you a sense of, okay, when most, what's the average of, how much debt will I be in when I graduate? And, we just find that's a very useful number. And obviously the amount of debt that you graduate with can also impact your specialty choice. That's just sort of the reality, simply because there are some specialties that pay more than others. And so that certainly is a very practical concern. Okay, what would you say is an ideal position to hold during a gap year for someone that likes research but wants to remain competitive? This is a great question, Jake. And we also have an article on, gap year experiences and what the best gap year experiences are. So I encourage you to read that article. But the key thing is, Jake, what are your interests? So if you are taking a gap year, you don't just necessarily want to choose something that's completely random. You want to try to identify, if possible, what are your interests, as an undergraduate, what did you get involved with, even if it's just sort of a cursory interest or superficial interest based on what you've done thus far. And then you want to try to pursue something that will help you to further explore those interests. Okay. And it can be something that someone is somewhat tangential, right? So let's say you did research as an undergraduate, and through that research, you learn something about a different discipline, or, because all studies at this point are very interdisciplinary, and, certainly interdisciplinary research, interdisciplinary courses, all of those terms are sort of, super in vogue now. So if you found a discipline that interested you, that was related to your research, you could explore research in that discipline. Obviously patient care experiences are always considered, very valuable by medical school admissions committees. So working as a scribe, working as an EMT, working as an OR tech, anything that's going to give you really hands-on clinical experience as much as you can, as opposed to shadowing, which is a very passive experience. We discourage international experiences during a gap year simply because although things are changing now, honestly, with virtual interviews, so our recommendations, in the coming years might be different for this. But usually when you have in-person interviews, and virtual interviews might be something that's here to stay, which I think would open up the possibility to international experiences, frankly. But if you are going to do international work, we discourage anything that is pay to play, right? So you want instead to be involved in something where you're working with an organization, or you're working directly with a hospital, or you're doing research, globally that, maybe is related to that area where you're specifically doing that research. So, but pay-to-play programs are something that those are never really valued or respected as much by medical school admissions committees. Of course, some of them can be valuable, but especially now that things are opening up. I mean, last year during COVID, last summer, obviously students were, very limited, a little more limited, and certainly this past year. And so I think that, at that time, medical school admissions committees just wanted to see you were doing something, but now that opportunities are, much more readily available, medical school admissions committees want to see that you're bolstering your candidacy by really being involved and invested in something. Okay. Okay, someone is asking about, I was wondering if I have an MD equivalent from Ireland and have done my year of internship in Ireland and plan to specialize under the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. Honestly, Isabel, we do not know much about medical education in Ireland, so I can't really answer that question. If you were interested in doing your residency training here in the United States, certainly we work with many international medical graduates who come to the United States for their specialty training, for their residency training. So that's certainly something that we could help you with. So I don't really know. It's going to be very difficult to work in the United States as a foreign trained physician, if that's where you did your specialty training as well. Most physicians who want to work in the United States as a physician, and get licensed here, they will then do their residency training here in the US. Okay, Serena, I was curious if you have any advice on sending update letters to medical schools if they put your application on hold. Okay, so it's interesting, schools are already starting with holds. We find that holds are very difficult, frankly, to convert to interview invitations. So we find that update letters of intent usually will most impact when you are put on a wait list. But it's usually pretty tough to convert a hold to an interview. So I'm just being completely honest on that front. However, If you have significant updates, and by significance, I mean something that, you know, you've really accomplished, that can either be first semester grades, and obviously we're not talking about, you know, doing anything then until the winter, significant, you know, research accomplishments, maybe something was accepted for publication or presentation. So, you know, you only want to be sending your medical schools significant updates, not minor things. So it would probably be a bit early in the process at this point to be sending an update letter. Most of our students are not sending update letters, frankly, until the winter, you know, when they really have something new to report, that, you know, something that has happened since submitting their application. Now, of course, let's say you submitted your application the end of May and you worked really hard on your research and you've had some interesting developments, you know, and I don't just mean like sort of findings, but your research has been recognized or acknowledged by some sort of outside organization or body over the summer, that could be something significant that you might want to update your schools on, but it is a bit early. My other question is, how do we ask advisors or professors to call schools in advocacy of my candidacy? I was reading on the MedEdits website, but was not sure if that looks bad if you ask. Another wonderful question, and yes, we definitely, this is something we definitely recommend to our students. So a lot of this has to do with how comfortable is your advisor or professor with calling medical schools to advocate for you. So Serena, if you are currently an undergraduate student, I don't know if you're in that category, but what you could do is you could actually have your pre-med advisor call to advocate for you. So certainly there will be pre-med advisors, depending on the school you go to. This is generally more true of, you know, of smaller colleges rather than larger colleges, smaller, liberal arts schools rather than universities. But the pre-med advisors will often call, medical schools where you're on hold or where you're waitlisted, to, kind of encourage them to give your candidacy, a closer look, and if you want to ask a professor or, an advisor or a principal investigator, a lot of this also depends on your relationship with that person. Is this somebody that you've talked to about your medical candidacy? Is this somebody who has said to you, my gosh, Serena, I think you're awesome. If there's anything I can do, to help you get into medical school, just let me know. I'll do anything. Right. So then that's somebody that you can then approach and say, Dr. Bob, I'm waitlisted at GW, and, this is my top choice school. And, I've heard that, principal investigators can call admissions committees to advocate on behalf of their students, just to, let the admissions office know how much they support a student's candidacy. Is this something you'd be willing to do? So professors and advisors understand politics in academics. So if this is something that they're comfortable with, they'll know what they need to say or what they should say or how to approach that. And then they probably will just ask you for a phone number and a contact. And I would give them, specifically at GW, it's someone, Dean McQuail is very involved in admissions there and has been for a very long time. But then you want to find out who the director is of admissions, or who the dean of admissions is. And, and I would give them both of those numbers and have them call whomever they're most comfortable calling, frankly. Okay, so let's see. Is EM a competitive specialty? EM is a competitive specialty. And I recently did a video on most recent, the 2022 match statistics you should be aware of, where I largely discussed the most competitive and then least competitive specialties. So EM kind of falls in the middle. Okay, it is not one of the most competitive, but it's not one of the least competitive either. Certainly there are a larger percentage of osteopathic and international graduates who match into emergency medicine. And one of the key metrics when, kind of trying to figure out if a specialty is more or less competitive is to look at the percentage. You can do it either way, but to look at the percentage of US seniors that match into that specialty. So the higher the percentage of US seniors that match into the specialty, the more competitive the specialty. That's just one metric, and I go over other metrics in the video that I think I posted, I believe it was last week or the week prior. You know, so fields like dermatology, orthopedic surgery, otolaryngology, neurosurgery, you know, kind of the surgical subspecialties, you know, that are, you know, higher paying, those tend to be more difficult specialties to match into for everybody. Okay, certainly much more difficult for the osteopathic and the international medical graduates. If you start a medical assistant position and a TA position, are these significant for updates? Okay, let's answer that question first. So it depends. Have you included those experiences in your primary application? So if you wrote about those experiences in your primary application because you knew they were forthcoming and you had just started them when you submitted your primary application, then I would say no. If they are not in your primary application, then perhaps you could send an update letter. But keep in mind that you want to try to save sort of your updates for when you really need them. Okay, so for GW, for example, if you're on hold there, you might want to send those updates now, specifically to GW, right? Just to kind of let them know, like, I was just put on hold. I was disappointed because GW really interests me for these reasons. And I want to update you on the fact that I have just started working as a medical assistant. I'll also be working as a TA, and I would very much appreciate the opportunity, to get an interview at GW. So I think that's a reasonable thing to send to GW, specifically if you're on hold and you're trying to convert a hold to a wait list. I wouldn't, though, send it to your other schools yet, just because you want to be able to kind of save that information for when you end up on a wait list somewhere and you're trying to get off the wait list. Okay. Is calling the best option only for your top choice school rather than something that is not my first? Someone can call a school to advocate for you, whether it's your first choice or not, right? Because in medicine, because acceptance rates are so low for medical schools, most students sort of don't have the luxury of having a first choice, right? They see where they get interviews, and if you get into more than one school, and then you have the luxury choice, or let's say you end up getting into two schools and you're waitlisted at a school where you would go there over the other two you've been accepted to, then, that becomes your first choice. But I would not have anyone start making phone calls at this point. It's just simply too early. How do medical schools view former corporate consultants? It depends. Medical schools view past experience well, whatever that is, as long as you have demonstrated that you are interested in medicine, right? So if you've, let's say, gone from one career to another career and you haven't really demonstrated that you've explored that interest in medicine, it's not really convincing to anybody that you want to be a physician. So you need to show the same amount of evidence as a pre-med who knew they wanted to go into medicine as a freshman in college, right? But in terms of having a past career, you could be more mature than the average medical school applicant, the average medical school student. But you just want to be able to make sure you demonstrate that commitment. Is there bias or a preferred way to convey that experience as a non-traditional applicant? Everyone holds biases, right? Even though all admissions officers at every level undergo some degree of bias training, everyone is going to hold personal biases. I just personally don't think there's any way that you can kind of get away from that. So this isn't so much about does a school hold a bias, it's about does an individual hold a bias. So if someone holds a personal bias against non-traditionals because they just had a really bad experience with a few non-traditional students, there's nothing you can do about that, right? So this is why you want to apply to a large number of schools so you can find enough people who appreciate and value that past experience. In terms of how to present it, I would imagine if you held a position for a number of years, that position would be very valuable to you, right? In some capacity, right? Because it's what you originally decided you wanted to do out of college. So maybe you'd make that a most meaningful. You also, in writing your personal statement, want to make sure that you incorporate that job and that former career into your story in your personal statement. So how did you get from point A to point B to point C? And, why did you end up as a corporate consultant in the first place? And then what experiences did you have that then made you reevaluate that and sort of, pivot towards medicine? So it's not so much do medical school admissions committees view something well or not well. It's more, do they understand and get your story? And are you conveying that story clearly to them, right? And this is the case, really for any applicant, right? Medical school admissions committees want to understand why you're interested in medicine, what sort of subspecialties or subdisciplines you're interested in, under the medicine umbrella, right? What is your niche? What is your spike? They're all different sort of, terminologies for what this might be. I mean, yes, most pre-medical students are going to do research. They're going to volunteer. They're going to have some sort of clinical exposure, right? These things are kind of prerequisites. We consider them prerequisites, for medical school applicants. But then what did you do within each of those kind of subsections within each of those requirements, and what is your specific niche that's going to kind of help you stand out in the application process? And so that's kind of what we try to think through with our students when we're working with them, both on their application materials, both in terms of, kind of choosing their pre-med path, right? When you're deciding on what experiences to pursue as an undergraduate, but then also when composing your application, when writing your documents, what do you want to be emphasizing within those documents, right? Because your application is sort of like, okay, here I am, I'm presenting this to the admissions committees. How do you want to present to them, and what do you want to present to them? And then the same thing holds true when you actually sit down for a medical school interview. You have to assume that the medical school interviewer does not necessarily know who you are, what you've done, what's in your application, simply because many people don't have time to review an application. And then, of course, if it's a multiple, if it's an MMI interview, then you may or may not have any chance to kind of present, kind of your story verbally. There are some multiple mini interviews where they have one station where they ask you kind of more generic interview questions, like tell me about yourself, but many don't, right? So you want to make sure that you present your story as comprehensively as possible within those primary application materials, because for schools that have different interview types like the MMI, that may be your only opportunity to kind of really tell your story, right? You're not going to have the opportunity at a, via a traditional interview to kind of, talk this through with another person. So I think that's something, also to keep in mind, as, certainly a large percentage of schools now do have MMI interviews as opposed to traditional interviews. So that's all for today. I thank you all for tuning in. Please email us if you have any comments, questions, concerns, info@mededits.com. We love hearing from our students. If there's another format or, another time that you think office hours would be more helpful for people, we would also love to hear that as well. I wish you all the best of luck. Enjoy the end of summer. We will not be here for the next 2 weeks, okay? So we will see everybody again at the end of August. I can't believe, summer is coming to a close so soon, but I hope it's been a good one for all of you. I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe and enjoying the sunshine. Okay, take care and good luck.